Hi everyone, this is Jarle from Handmade Cards, Happy Heart. Thank you for joining me today. Today I have a slimline card for you that involves lots and lots of die cutting. So first I will show you which dies I used. These are all lawn fawn dies. I started off with the Delightful Daisies, then the large mushroom house, that's an old die already, then the birch trees, and then for my grassy border I used those grassy border dies. So off camera I already die cut everything, so here I have my two card panels, and then I have a piece of paper with all of my die cuts. So I have die cut the mushrooms, I think I die cut 3 of the mushrooms, then 2 of the daisies and 1 large mushroom house. So I did that off camera to save a little bit of time today. Okay, I wanted to give a little bit more color to my die cuts, so I started out by taking out my distress inks. For my trees I just went over with a little bit of antique linen. This just gives a little bit more browny shade to my die cut trees. Then I used the distress ink in Candied Apple for my roof of my mushroom house. I didn't choose to blend all the other little mushrooms. I just ink blended over my large mushroom house. Then I did the same with my grass and with my stems of the Delightful Daisy stencil with some mowed lawn ink. I wanted to kind of know where to place all of my die cuts before stamping out a few images of a few stamp sets. So I went ahead and I adhered everything together of all my different die cuts. So here I'm assembling that little tiny mushroom house with those little grassy borders, a little window, and then that tiny doorknob. Then I also die cut 3 little mushrooms. So you have to die cut a base, and then first you need to adhere the frame, and then after that you can puzzle piece everything together. Like here I am just putting on all those black frames on top of the base. That's actually very handy because then you know exactly where everything else will have to go. So you can just kind of slide those tiny pieces in there. This was a very time-consuming card just because of the die cutting. I'm not that much of a die cutter really, but I really liked how the card turned out, so I think I will be doing it more in the future. Also, those new dies from Lawn Fawn are just amazing and extremely adorable to use on die cuts or on scene cards. Now with the daisy I just did the same, so I cut my black base of the daisy, then I adhered the frame with some liquid glue, and then again I have to puzzle piece all the pieces inside. It's just like a little tiny puzzle you make. It's very relaxing really. For my the top of that daisy, I think I used some sunflower cardstock, And for my petals, I just used some Nina Classic Rest Solar White cardstock because I wanted to add a little bit of a shadow with my Copic markers. So that's why I used my Nina paper. For my stems and my leaves, I think I used cilantro cardstock from Fawn. And then again, like I showed you earlier, I just ink blended all those pieces just to give it a little bit more color and a little bit more definition. So here I went ahead with my Copic markers. As you can see, I used C1 and I think C00 and the colorless blender to just blend everything out. And it just gives a little bit more of a shadow to those die cuts. It doesn't really need that shading. It looks gorgeous without too. I went ahead and I placed all my images on my card panel before die cutting my grass. I wanted to know exactly how the placement was going to be of my images, so I knew exactly where my border would start and where it would end, like how wide it should be on my card, etc. So I really wanted to know where my daisies would go, my mushroom house, my trees, etc. Also because I want to add a few stamped images too on this card. So here I'm just fiddling around with my daisies, with those little adorable mushrooms, taking my border die and just putting away all my die cuts. Then I am just putting on some low-tech tape there before running it through my die cut machine. For my Grassy Border, I used some Twisted Citron Distress ink, and then to add a little bit more shadow, I think I used some Mowed Lawn. It's actually the same color as my stems. I think that cilantro cardstock really fits well with that Twisted Citron. So I go back and forth here with my two colors. Then I put down some Mowed Lawn and sprayed it with water and splattered on some. I splattered on some splatters on my border. Now it's time to ink blend my sky. So I used some picked raspberry, wilted violet and blueprint sketch. I think it's quite a dramatic sky for this, but I really love those bright and cheerful colors. I always use Bristol Smooth for my ink blending. As I already mentioned, I think in previous videos, this cardstock is really the best kind of cardstock to use for ink blending. I always start with my lightest color, here the picked raspberry, then I go to the medium color, then I come back with the lights, and then I go to the darkest color, here the blueprint sketch. Then I blend it out again with my wilted violet, and then again with my picked raspberry. So I just go back and forth all the time until I'm happy with my blending. I think it's also very important that you add enough ink to your cardstock to get a very good blend. So here you can still see that harsh line. I'm trying to blend it out again with my picked raspberry, so my lightest color, and this looks better to me. I think the trick is to just add a lot of ink, use high quality paper, and then have patience really. I think this ink blending always takes me a while. Again, I used some splatters of the blueprint sketch and the picked raspberry, and I also added a little bit of shimmer to the card panel with that Lawn Fawn shimmer bottle. I don't know what it's called exactly. So here I am placing everything again on my cards, and then I'm taking a bunch of stamp sets from Lawn Fawn again. I'm placing those stamps on my panel just to know which stamps I will have to stamp out and which ones I will have to color. So I took the Gnome stamp sets, then all the clouds stamp sets, just to add a little bit of interest to my sky. And then the last one is the Gleeful Gardens. So I already went ahead and stamped everything. I was going to show you all of my Copic coloring now, but I totally forgot to press the record button. So I'm very, very sorry for that. So you won't be seeing a lot of coloring today in my video, but I will be sure to list down all of my Copic combos that I used in the description box below. For my little gnomes, I used the BV04, 02 and 00, I think, or 01. I will just add them to the description box. I think it's easier. I tend to use not that many colors on one card. I always try to limit the amount of different colors. For me, that's really the hardest part of making a card. That's choosing every color, the colors for the sky, the colors for the cardstocks, the colors for the ink blending, for my coloring. I find that really the hardest part of card making. So if you have any suggestions, any tips or advice you can give me on picking out my colors, please mention them in the comments below. I will be glad to test them all out. Here I'm adhering all of my die cuts. I went ahead and started with the die cuts that went behind that grassy border. Then I adhered my grassy border with my liquid glue. And then after that I placed all of my other die cuts, also with liquid glue, on my scene cards. For my stamped images, I used a few foam squares as well, just to add a little bit more dimension to my cards. As all the other things were like more flat on my card panel, I did want to add a little bit of dimension on my gnomes. I didn't have any more room on the front of my cards, so I did have to place my image on the inside. It's a happy belated birthday, so it really fits well with the gnome in that speech bubble on the front of my cards. So I'm adhering my whole front of my panel onto my card base. I used liquid glue as I didn't want it to be all crooked. And then I finished off my cards by adding some shimmer to the heads of those little gnomes. And then with a black gel pen, I just went over those tiny dots on that daisy. So this is my finished card. I hope you like it. Have a wonderful day. Bye.